All right, Amanda, good morning.
Good morning, Brad.
Appreciate you taking some time to speak with me about your experience in this online doctoral program. And I have a few questions here to ask you about how you picked it and what your experience has been like so far in the program.
Okay.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you is how did you become aware of the particular doctoral program that we're in?
So I've been an employee at Chat State for a decade, and it kind of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to pursue a doctorate at some point, sometime. And then I learned that the way the college was going to handle reimbursing employees for pursuing their higher education was changing. And so we used to be able to take 2 classes a semester. One would be waived and one would be reimbursed. And they were doing away with the reimbursement. And that made me pretty upset. So I thought, here I've waited too long, and now it's going to be an impossibility because financially that I can afford to do this. And around that same time, this campus announcement came out that said that ETSU was specifically looking for folks at the community college to start this inaugural cohort for community college leadership. And I didn't read the email really closely, but I left or walked away from that thinking this is a way for me to get my education financed, because I had the impression that the college was going to fully support people in this. And I think one of the reasons why I had that impression is because it was going to be limited to 2 people. And because I'm so cynical, I was like, well, they know which 2 people they're going to pick, but I'm going to throw my name in the hat. I'm not going to get picked, but if I do get picked, it's going to be paid for. So I didn't put a lot of thought into it. It was just like in July, and the cohort started in August. And like a typical Chat State student, the next thing I know, I get an email from the president's office that says, you've been selected. You need to follow up with ETSU, supply all of this documentation and application. And so I'm thinking at this point, it's getting paid for, and I'm one of 2 people on my campus. And the president has picked me, and I didn't even know she knew my name at this point. So I'm thinking I can't not do it, because then it would be a huge amount on my face. So I scramble and get everything submitted. Then I discovered, in fact, I was going to be paying out of pocket for one of the courses. And there were 4 other people from my institution who actually followed up on everything that was required. But I think there were at least a dozen names on that email of people from Chat State selected for the EDD or the Community College Leadership Certificate. So I kind of stumbled into it with a lot of misconception. But then once I had gotten far enough along to apply, I was like, well, I'm in it. And it was just an added bonus that there were more than 2 people from Chat State pursuing it.
Great. Did you know before you applied or as you applied that it was going to have kind of a cohort structure?
Not really. That wasn't one of the things that stuck out to me in my mind. I thought it was cool that it was specifically tailored to community colleges. That's something that in my master's program was completely overlooked. I was in a student affairs master's program, and there was virtually no attention paid to community colleges as a sector of institutions within higher ed. So I really was attracted to the fact that this was going to be something that was specifically tailored and focused to community college employees, to learn about the important role that community colleges play. So the cohort itself wasn't a major deal maker or breaker for me, but I was very interested in that certificate.
Can you talk about the idea of a cohort and, just to kind of define it, what's your operational definition in your head when somebody talks about a cohort-based program?
Well, for me, my master's program was a cohort-based program. And those were people, we all started together, and we were pursuing the same goals and objectives. We were in classes together, and our success was kind of interdependent. These were people who I don't think I would have had such a positive memory of my master's program if it wasn't for the cohort. So my operational definition, these are your people, just very simply put. These are your peers, and you're going to work together, and you're kind of moving and progressing along the same time frame, completing things on a certain schedule, and ultimately you're going to graduate together. So, but the people is what a cohort really is about for me.
Do you remember how large your master's cohort was?
Yes, we were 16 in number, and we were the largest class that they had ever had. Usually they had about 10 students in their college student affairs master's program. And so there were 16 of us, and I remember the upperclassmen kind of being a little skeptical about how we all got into this program and, what our success was going to look like. But they matched us with a second-year student. The first-year students were matched for the first-year student, and I was at UGA, and they called them our Bulldog buddies. So this was somebody who had done what you were about to do and could kind of point you in the right direction. But it was very collegial between our 16-member cohort, a little bit more competition between the first years and the second years, as I recall.
And how many of your 16 members of your cohort made it across the finish line together?
16.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But this was a totally different time of our lives. Most of us were fresh out of undergrad, probably between age 22 to 25. There was one old guy, Joe, from the Navy, who was in his late 20s. Papa Joe, we called him. But we lived on campus or in Athens. We took all of our classes in 411 Adderhold Hall, and this is what we lived and breathed. We all had an internship or assistantship on campus. So for 2 years, this was our sole dedication. None of us were married, had children, anything like that.
So when you think about the cohort that you're in currently, let's talk about, because I know there may be a couple different cohorts to consider. So the group of people who began the graduate certificate with you, can you talk about that experience, being a part of that cohort, maybe in contrast to your master's experience?
Yeah. So when I was in my master's program, we were all really green. I mean, none of us had jobs. We basically left one academic program and started another. Very much felt like I was among my peers. The community college leadership program for me felt a little intimidating because I'm kind of a mid-level management position in my current role, and I was pretty new to that. I think I was just named Director of Honors like shortly before starting this program. So to come into a room where you've got a former regent, several VPs, AVPs, I felt a little intimidated and like I didn't exactly belong, Felt a little bit out of my league, which was a stark contrast to my master's program. But as the course work commenced and we moved from week 1 meeting to semester 3, I definitely felt like I was among my peers again. It just took a little bit of time to kind of get that initial impression of these are people who far outrank you and have much more experience than you, and you're sitting beside them in a class, you know.
So, of the people who began the graduate certificate in community college leadership, do you have any sense of how many of them have transferred or continued on into the full EDD program?
Well, I know, let's see, there were, 8 of us? Am I remembering that correctly? That started the certificate program?
I
Maybe,
don't remember.
I can't remember. There were 2 from Northeast, 1 from Nashville State, 1 from Ball State. I can't remember.
Ball State initially.
Oh, that's right. There were 2 from Ball State. Columbia, was there someone from Columbia State? The new VP of enrollment?
Bruce Jackson.
Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
4 of us. There was about 11 people. Let's just say a dozen people, just to be safe. I don't want to forget anybody. But of those dozen people, I think 4 are currently in the EDD program at ETSU. And I think Brian, upon leaving the certificate, he didn't complete the certificate, but I think he was going to pursue a doctoral program somewhere else. So I imagine he's probably pursuing his education elsewhere, but I would say that it's probably about a third of us who are actually in the EDD program now at ETSU from that CCL cohort.
Do you have any perceptions or feelings, thoughts, guesses as to why we've gone from 12-ish to 4?
I think some people were never interested in pursuing anything beyond the certificate. And I think a couple people really didn't recognize that this was an academic program. You know, they just weren't up to putting in the time and the effort. And so as soon as the certificate concluded, they were out, maybe even out before the certificate concluded. But I think a lot of it has to do with personal aspirations, and I would say that that's attributable to the largest majority not moving on. The students who I knew that wanted to pursue it and who didn't, I think they were just overwhelmed by all of it. You know, maybe didn't have a lot of support at their home institutions, not a lot of clarity in what was coming next, and having a personality that kind of needed that sense of this is what's going to happen next, and not comfortable with ambiguity at all. So those are the reasons that come to mind. But and then obviously the one person from Chat State who didn't continue on even with the certificate just because of health related issues. So pretty variable, but I think one of the things that I was expecting is that everybody would want to pursue the EDD, and when I got into the class, I quickly discovered that that wasn't necessarily the case.
When you think about the experience in that certificate cohort, the organizers of the cohort, what kind of efforts, if any, do you remember them making to strengthen the cohort itself as a cohort?
For the whole CCL cohort?
Yes.
I think they were pretty intentional about mandating those in-person weekends. And that to me was a really valuable component of establishing the cohort, being able to actually talk in person with the people that you'd been conversing with in an online environment. One of the cohort members even opened up her home to a couple of us who were traveling from Chattanooga. So I think there was some loose intentionality maybe from the cohort administrators, and they tried to make a big deal that this was the first cohort, and really commended us for our efforts and tried to keep us engaged. But I think a lot of the actual connection kind of happened organically and formally just by nature of being brought to those weekend meetings, and being able to text back and forth once we got back and kind of have our offline discussions, not necessarily in the course management system.
Just to follow up on that, because that's an interesting point to me. What do you think, because I participated in some of those also, what do you think kind of motivated those offline conversations? Why were they not in the course management system?
Well, I think nobody wants to, I think everybody just needs a little space to vent, among a peer, a friend. Sometimes things weren't clear. Sometimes expectations weren't always made up front. Sometimes the request made of us seemed unreasonable. And so you're not going to go online and say, hi, I'm Amanda Bennett, and I think this is crazy. But you're going to send your friend a text. It's like, can you believe that we have 250 pages to read in addition to this other stuff? And now we've got to drive to Gallatin this weekend. And, I think everybody just needs space to vent. And sometimes it's not about venting, but other times there may be an issue that was particularly pertinent to something on our own campus, or if I read an article that related to something happening at Vol State, I would want to just send a quick message to my cohort member there. Just keep those informal lines of communication open, because I think they're just as valuable, if not more valuable, than what actually happens in a discussion board. And you don't have to check for grammar and APA format and all of that other stuff.
So now that you are pursuing the full EDD, do you consider yourself to be in a cohort now?
Very much so, with my colleagues at Chat State. And I think there's an overarching cohort number for us. I know there's some shell in D2L that has like cohort number, whatever. That to me is pretty meaningless, although that's probably how the institution identifies me and my classmates as a member of whatever cohort. And it probably consists of people beyond those of us at Chat State. But when I think of my cohort, it is the three classmates, myself, from Chat State that started that certificate together and have all advanced into the EDD. And I would have loved to have some of the folks from the CCL certificate continue with us, because I feel like that added a richness that we no longer have, that perspective of this is how my institution does it, or those different experiences. Because right now sometimes it can be a little myopic about this is what we do at Chat State. And I really appreciated having those other perspectives from colleagues across the state who had worked at other institutions, some in the private sector. I miss having that dynamic, but as it is now, there's the four of us. That's my cohort. I'm sticking to it.
So you mentioned that there may be other students that the university would identify as being in your cohort. I think I heard you say that your level of interaction with those students has been minimal. Is that accurate?
Yes. Beyond what was interactions with people in the community college leadership, I don't recall ever having a conversation outside of a discussion board post with anyone from ETSU at all. So I wouldn't even, maybe minimals, non-existent, I think would be the best way to put it. I can't even recall someone's name that's been in a class other than from that certificate program are the four of us.
All right. Do you think that the physical proximity of the four of us who are at Chattanooga State, the fact that we're physically located on the same campus, do you think that contributes to the experience of being in a cohort?
I think it does. I think it enables us to get together periodically. I know we try to have our weekly meetings just to kind of assess what's upcoming, what our approach is going to be to get the assignments done. It also lends itself to, hey, I forgot my textbook at home. Does anybody have it? I need to do my statistics homework. Can you take a picture of the problems? The other benefit of our proximity, I think, is just knowing that I'm going to see you guys on campus, and in some ways we're accountable to each other, and it's not like I can just slip away. It's like, why aren't you in class? We kind of take on different leadership roles. Like, I think I usually try to make sure that everybody's got their fee waiver stuff in on time and fill out our Outlook calendars of when stuff is due. Andy is really good about, diving into the material and making sure he can kind of give us good direction on how we should approach things, how much time it's going to take us to complete something. Michelle is amazing at always having stuff hard copy. So when we're in our meetings and the rest of us are trying to pull up stuff on phones, she opens up that notebook and it's like, well, here's exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And Brad is always great at helping with any kind of technological issue. Like, I can remember having trouble with getting onto SPSS from home, and you were driving to Nashville or something, and you were like my personal IT support. If we weren't physically on the same campus, we wouldn't have those interactions and that sort of relationship.
So not to lead you in your response too much, I don't really know how to approach what I'm trying to get at, but I am curious, if you did not have your local colleagues, I guess my first question, and trying to think about, if you did not have your local colleagues, your local cohort, do you think that you would still be in the program?
There is not a doubt in my mind. I would have quit this a long time ago. And even with the cohort, that very first year, like every weekend, I was like, why am I doing this? Because that's when I was doing my coursework and missing out on all sorts of stuff with the family. And I think I'm always, I don't know if this is a character flaw or attribute, but I'm always more accountable to other people than I am myself. I will not show up for myself on a number of things. But if somebody else is expecting me to do something or to be there or to fulfill a commitment, I'm the most loyal person you'll find. But if it wasn't for my cohort, I wouldn't have that level of accountability, and I would have quit long time ago, for sure.
So the premise of what I want to ask you next is kind of invalid, because you've just said without the local cohort, you wouldn't still be in the program. But let's pretend you were.
Okay.
Do you think that if you didn't have access to the local cohort, that it would have caused you to reach out to the other online students and try to develop some kind of a relationship there?
That's an interesting question, because I don't know. My personality is such that I'm not, I can be pretty reserved and shy until I get to know people. And being in an online environment is completely foreign to me. Had never taken an online course prior to this. So I don't think I would have had that level of comfort with reaching out to a random name on on a class list or a discussion board. And I remember feeling a little bit guilty that we had each other when we first started. And there were folks like Jeff, who didn't have anybody on his campus. And so I remember us trying to help coordinate. Well, like we typically meet at this time, maybe you can Skype in or text in, because I wanted to be able to provide that bridge for my classmate, but there was no replicating it. I mean, we had the benefit of just being able to pop into an empty classroom or study room, whereas his schedule was very rigid. Like he had a lunch break at this specific time and so forth. So for me personally, I don't see myself being the one reaching out for help to strangers, particularly when they were, like I said before, I was pretty intimidated initially. You guys were what made it approachable and down to earth.
So if you had a magic wand and no constraints, do you think it's even possible for an online experience, a purely online experience, to be as rich, if rich is the right word, as a traditional on-ground course?
My personal bias is I just don't think you can replace human interaction. I just don't think it can be completely replaced by technology. There are some things that are great with technology, like right now you're in Nashville and I'm in Chattanooga. We can continue to do our work even though we're not in the same zip code. But I don't think that while I see the value of a cohort, I think it should almost like be a bring a buddy to school with you. Like find someone. And two people do it together, because I think that's what's going to sustain folks more than just here's a random assortment of people who have this interest from across the state, or they're reaching out even now into North Carolina for some of the colleagues and classmates. So I don't think it can be replicated, but I do think maybe that should be something. And that they stress in the recruitment materials is like we have found people who have someone to rely on outside of the online environment persist at such a rate higher than those who do it by themselves. And I don't think that's any knock on people who don't have the ability to have someone else to do it with them. But for an EDD, if you reach out to other colleagues, surely there's one other person on your campus who's going to want to do this. And so maybe that could be a strategy for recruiting students.
Do you think, I think it's fair to say that in our program, most of the student-to-student interaction, especially in the full EDD, is limited to text-based discussion posts. Mm-hmm. Would it make a positive difference to have some synchronous time where everybody has to log in and look at each other even though we're not physically together? Or do you think there's just no substitute for the physical being in the same room?
Well, I think it would definitely add value. And one of my critiques of D2L is that it doesn't have the ability for us to basically Skype with one another within that course shell. I think it would add value. My only critique of that is when we have had those big meetings, people still feel pretty inhibited to comment. There's sometimes a little bit of lag with the audio and the video. It hasn't always felt like a valuable use of time for me, but I think maybe doing more where you're paired with another person, like you have to work with Brad on this project. And then it's just the two people talking, or maybe even having three people. I think that could be valuable. But what's been the experience is either nobody talks in those large groups, or the one person constantly talks, and then you just can't get a word in as edgewise, even if you wanted to say something. But yeah, I think there might be some value in attempting some structured conversation around the course content.
All right. Well, I have maybe just one or two final questions. So thinking ahead, do you believe that you will earn this EDD in this program?
I think I'm pretty confident I will finish. I would be devastated if I didn't after contributing or putting this much time and effort and money into something. I feel like I've made a pretty significant investment. My goal is to finish. But I recognize that life doesn't just stop because you're in school. In fact, it just complicates things further. And so while it's my strong desire to finish the program, who knows? It's one of those things. I take it literally 1 week at a time, not even one course at a time, one week at a time. Like, what's due on Saturday or Sunday? Do I think I can finish? All right, let's do this. But yes, I want to. It's definitely a goal that I want to achieve.
If you had to kind of weigh, you've mentioned a couple factors that are sort of holding you in the program. You've got the investment of your previous time and money, your sunk cost maybe.
Yeah.
And you've got your local cohort. How do you weigh those? Is it mostly one or the other that you feel is holding you in the program? Are they equally balanced? How would you describe that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially the cohort was what was keeping me in it. Now, I think I would persist even if I didn't have the cohort, just because, I mean, it's close. We're more than halfway there. And I think it's no knock on you guys, but at some point you have to just finish what you started, and whether there are people there beside you or not. But my intention, and I think we're all invested in this to the same degree, is if we want each other to finish as much as we want to finish ourselves. So there's a lot of things that are pulling us in that direction to complete. I don't think any of us have talked about quitting for quite some time, although that was a pretty popular topic of conversation in the beginning.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate your thoughts.
Awesome, Brad. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.